I walked out of the notary's office with my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped my bag. You know that sudden rush when something invisible tips over, and you realize your life is about to collapse. That's exactly the bolt that hit me when I overheard his voice, my ex-stepfather's smooth, deliberate tone, floating casually down the hallway. He was speaking with the notary, telling him I was already preparing to vacate the apartment, that I'd graciously agreed to hand back the lease. I hadn't agreed to anything. In fact, I'd been clinging to that apartment as if it was the last board in a storm. It was my home, my anchor. And there he was, dismantling it with a single conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. What made it even worse? The calmness. He sounded like he was doing me a favor. Like this was just cleanup, administrative efficiency. My name never appeared on the official lease since it was secured by him years ago, when my mom and he were together. After the divorce, Mom had distanced herself, but the lease stayed in his name, because it would be less complicated that way. Less complicated for whom? Certainly not for me. As I stood frozen just a few feet from the office door, I swear his words had a second blade hidden in them. She knows it's for her own good. She'll be better off somewhere smaller, cheaper. And the worst part wasn't just what he said. It was how easily the notary nodded along, as if my life were no more than a spreadsheet, a square footage issue, an obligation to be shuffled off. By the time I stumbled outside into the sunlight, I couldn't feel my face. Imagine watching your future being erased in someone else's handwriting without your say. My pulse screamed in my ears. How many people had he already told this lie to? Was Mom in on it? Had my relatives heard the same story? I wanted to confront him right then, scream until the entire office heard me. But instead, I kept walking, my phone pressed against my palm like a lifeline. If he was moving chess pieces around me, silently, invisibly, what chance did I have unless I started fighting back? And yet, the thought of blowing everything open terrified me. Legal documents, housing contracts. These weren't things you could fight with just emotion. But one question kept circling, louder and louder, refusing to let go. If he could calmly rewrite the story of me leaving, what else had he already rewritten behind my back? Shall I write the next chapter? The moment I got home, I sank into the corner of my sofa, replaying every word I'd overheard. She's already preparing to vacate. Every syllable felt like a hammer. Why did he sound so certain, so confident, when I hadn't said a single word to him about leaving? I wish I could tell you packing up and finding another apartment was an option. It wasn't. This wasn't a matter of just signing a fresh lease somewhere else. The building I lived in was one of the few rent-controlled properties left in the area. If I left, I'd be priced out instantly. My job barely covered my living expenses as it was. To lose this place meant not just moving. It meant exile, forced to live an hour and a half away, maybe with strangers, my independence shredded. And all this because years ago, when Mom and he moved in together, he had insisted the lease go under his name. "I've got the credit score, I'll handle it," he'd said. And when they eventually split, he kept the paperwork under his belt. He made this big paternalistic speech. "Don't stress, I'll leave it as it is, for your stability." I thought it was generosity. I thought it was his one decent act after the chaos of their breakup. Now it was clear. It wasn't generosity. It was leverage. A leash around my neck that I'd been too naive to notice until he yanked it tight. I told Mom what I'd overheard, desperate for her to react with outrage. Instead, she gave me this soft, evasive comment. "Oh, maybe you misunderstood. He wouldn't just push you out, not after everything." Her words burned. She still wanted to believe my ex-stepfather was reasonable, that he wasn't the kind of man to wield power like a knife. I stared at her, wondering how much she really knew. But one fact kept me pinned. The lease was not mine. No matter how long I paid on time, no matter how much of my life was stitched into that apartment, all it took was his signature, or his silence, to rip it away. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind spun through numbers. My salary, the rent hikes in every nearby listing, the cost of storage if I lost the apartment abruptly. I wasn't just fighting to keep four walls around me. I was fighting to keep my entire daily life from disintegrating. And then came the worst thought. If he'd already told the notary I was moving out, how soon before I'd get notice from a property manager? Would I walk into my lobby one day to find a letter taped to my door, telling me I had 30 days to vanish? The question wasn't whether he could do it. The question was, how was he planning to make me believe I had no choice? Shall I write the next chapter? The first signs came in tiny gestures, the kind you almost brush off until they start stacking into a pattern. I remember one evening when he stopped by under the pretense of checking in. He lingered at my kitchen table, sipping tea like he owned the place, and in the middle of casual chatter, he dropped it. "You should appreciate how low I've kept the rent for you. Anyone else would have raised it by now. You're getting quite the deal." It was unsettling because I'd always believed my payments went directly to the building management. Was he pocketing money in between? Or was he just framing it as though I owed him loyalty? The worst part, he said it with this smug gentleness, like I should feel indebted, as if my home wasn't a right I worked for, but a favor I must constantly repay. A few days later, I found building documents spread across the counter after Mom had visited him. Papers I'd never seen before. Condo association rules, with little sections underlined about lease termination and eviction clauses. I asked Mom why they were there, and she blinked innocently. Maybe he'd accidentally left them. Accidentally? Highlighted sections on eviction don't appear by accident. It began to feel like psychological warfare. Instead of telling me directly, he planted objects in my path to remind me this wasn't really mine. A paper here, a comment there. Subtle little nudges to make me feel like a guest overstaying her welcome. And maybe that's what he wanted, to erode my confidence until I packed on my own. When I tried to bring it up to him, his response was syrupy but poisonous. "All I've ever done is give you stability. And do I get thanks? No, I get suspicion. I'm not your enemy. I'm the reason you're comfortable." Do you know what that does to your mind? It makes you question yourself. Was I being paranoid? Imagining undertones? He said it so convincingly, dripping with faux disappointment, that for a flicker, I doubted my own anger. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe he really thought he was helping. But deep down, I knew. These weren't accidents. These were strategic cuts, small enough to brush off individually, together deep enough to bleed me dry of dignity. And that creeping erosion of truth, it terrified me. Because if he could twist my gratitude against me, what would happen when he decided to push harder? The next time he framed me as ungrateful, it wasn't just in private. It was to the rest of the family. Shall I write the next chapter? It happened at my mom's Sunday dinner, a small gathering, just a few uncles, cousins, and family friends. I almost skipped it because I was drained from living under this cloud, but something told me I needed to be there. And thank God I was. We were halfway through the meal when he cleared his throat in that performative way of his, like a politician about to give a speech. With a little smirk, he announced, "Well, since she'll be moving to a more appropriate place soon, I guess we'll all have to help her pack, right? It'll be a family effort." The room froze. My fork slipped against the plate so loudly I swear it echoed. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, perfectly at ease, and continued, It's for the best. It's too much apartment for one young woman, and you'll thank me when you're settled somewhere more fitting. I mean, nobody wants to see you drowning in bills." I caught a cousin, or maybe two, exchanging glances. In that instant, I saw what he had been doing, crafting a narrative behind my back. Publicly, he positioned himself as the benevolent guardian, the wise figure gently guiding me toward practicality. Privately, of course, he was twisting the noose around my neck. I tried to laugh it off, but the burn in my chest gave me away. "I'm not moving anywhere," I snapped. "That's not true." "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his tone dipped in syrup that reeked of condescension. "Don't be defensive. We've discussed this. We discussed this." Those 3 words nearly broke me, because in front of everyone, they rewrote the truth. Suddenly, I wasn't fighting for my apartment. I was fighting for my credibility. My relatives looked at me with polite pity, like a child throwing a tantrum because she didn't want to eat her vegetables. And just like that, the floor beneath me shifted. He'd drawn the line in public. It wasn't a rumor or a whisper anymore. It was a declaration. My supposed future was being decided in the middle of a dinner table, my voice erased in real time. That night, lying awake, my skin felt hot with humiliation. He wanted me isolated, painted as dramatic, unstable, resistant to reason. If the family saw me as the problem, he could bulldoze the lease right out from under me, smiling all the while. I promised myself something then. No more polite conversations. No more pretending to misunderstand subtle digs. This wasn't about embarrassment anymore. It was about survival. But when I tried to fix this myself, I realized just how much power he really held in his grip. Shall I write the next chapter? The very next week, I marched into the property manager's office, determined to seize back some control. I had rehearsed every word on the bus ride there, convinced that if I just explained the situation, they'd work with me. I laid it all out. How I'd been the one paying rent for years. How my ex-stepfather no longer lived with us. How the lease should reflect the actual occupant. The woman behind the desk listened politely, nodding in all the right places. For a moment, I thought it might work. Then she slid her glasses up the bridge of her nose and gave me the verdict. "I'm sorry, but only the current leaseholder can initiate a transfer of the contract. Our hands are tied. You'd need his signed consent to move the lease into your name, or he'd have to terminate it himself before we could issue a new one." My stomach dropped. So even if I've been paying everything, I have no standing at all. She offered me a sympathetic smile that felt like a dagger. "Legally, no. Unless he agrees, there's nothing we can do." I walked out of that office with a folder of paperwork in my hands that might as well have been blank. All it said to me was, "You're powerless." Every path circled back to him and his consent. His signature was the gatekeeper to my stability, and he knew it. That night, I tried to reason with him over the phone. I said calmly, "All I need is for you to sign the transfer, so the lease is finally in my name." He chuckled lightly, the sound dripping disdain. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. You'd never manage the paperwork. And really, why would you want that headache? This way, it stays clean and safe. I'm the adult here. I keep things steady. You just focus on your little life." "My little life? You mean the one being erased behind my back?" His tone turned icy. "You need to stop making this dramatic. Nobody is erasing you. I'm protecting you. Do you know how ungrateful you sound right now?" Ungrateful. That word again, wielded like a blade. My heat rose. Not just anger, but despair. Because I realized then that it wasn't incompetence preventing me from getting the lease. It was deliberate obstruction. He wanted the leash tight. He wanted the narrative that I was a charity case under his shelter. If I took over the lease, he lost his control. And worse for him, He lost his image of being the responsible savior. And I started to see the cracks in his act. People like him don't just control silently. They boast. They drop hints. And if I listened closer, I might catch him exposing himself. Sure enough, the slip came sooner than I expected, when he thought I wasn't listening. Shall I write the next chapter? It happened 3 nights later. I was visiting Mom to drop off some groceries, and as usual he was there, sprawled across her armchair like he'd never left even after the divorce, his phone glued to his ear. I tried to keep out of sight, lingering in the hallway while Mom fussed in the kitchen. That was when I caught it, his voice dropping into that falsely confiding register he used when he wanted to impress someone. "She has no idea," he said, chuckling low. "People think I'm housing her out of kindness, but it's brilliant, really. As long as the lease is under my name, she can't make a move without me. Everyone sees me as the stable one, the generous one. Truth is, she couldn't leave even if she wanted to." My grip on the grocery bag tightened so hard I thought the handles would snap. The ease in his voice. It wasn't about me. It was about image. He wasn't holding the lease to protect me. He was holding it to protect his reputation as the reliable ex-stepfather who hadn't abandoned his family. My entire livelihood was just a prop in his theater of magnanimity. The person on the other end laughed. He laughed back. And then, as if to twist the knife, he added, "And if someday she tries to act out, everyone will already know I kept her roof over her head all these years. Who's going to believe her version?" I nearly dropped the groceries right there in the hallway. There it was, in his own words, the smug reality behind his kindness. And worse, his plan wasn't just to control me, but to discredit me before anyone ever suspected. That night, pacing in my apartment, my mind split in two. Part of me wanted to storm into his next conversation and repeat every syllable I had heard, to strip his mask away in front of Mom's entire living room. But another part hesitated. Would anyone even believe me? He'd been planting seeds of "she's ungrateful, she's dramatic" for months. In a twisted way, he was right. He'd already landscaped the narrative so that my truth looked like a tantrum. But now, finally, I had something concrete. I didn't just feel cornered. I had evidence that he was deliberately playing this game. The question wasn't if I confronted him, but when. I could no longer sit back quietly and hope reason would prevail. In that moment, I knew I needed legal advice. I needed professional ears to hear his manipulations spelled out, before he boxed me out completely. Going to a lawyer meant war. Open, undeniable war, the kind my mother dreaded most. But what choice did I have when survival was now on the line? Shall I write the next chapter? I barely slept that night, replaying his words until they carved themselves into me like a brand. She couldn't leave even if she wanted to. He wasn't just controlling my roof. He was feeding off the power of being the gatekeeper of my independence. By the next morning, my fear had hardened into something else. Resolve. I made an appointment with a tenant rights lawyer downtown. Just scheduling it felt like betrayal to my mother, because I knew once this surfaced, there would be no turning back. Mom hated conflict. She always begged for peace, for keeping things civilized. But I was done being civilized while he polished his image by cornering me like a pet in a cage. The office was cramped, law books stacked on every surface, sunlight pooling on a messy table. As I laid out the situation, the lawyer didn't flinch. I explained the overheard call, the lease under his sole name, the psychological games. The lawyer's answer was blunt. "You technically have no legal right to the lease right now, but if you've been paying consistently, you may be able to argue for occupancy rights. And more important, you have every right to stop letting him weaponize this against you." Occupancy rights. The phrase sounded like oxygen. The lawyer asked calmly, Did you document the payments? Any receipts? Bank transfers? Thankfully, yes. I had years' worth of records, every month's rent flowing from my account into his. But still, the risk lit up in my chest. If I pursued this, I'd be ripping open something ugly, not just legally, but emotionally. Mom would see it as an attack. He, on the other hand, would spin it as proof that I was the unstable, vindictive one. The lawyer leaned across the table and said something that stuck. He relies on silence. If you don't speak, his version will become the only one anyone remembers. That night, staring at the lease copy he had left on my counter months ago, by accident, I finally made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait until he ambushed me with an eviction disguised as kindness. I needed to corner him, with truth, in a place where others could not ignore it. I thought of the notary office again, the crisp papers, the staged authority of it all. That would be the arena. If he wanted to play the role of the magnanimous provider, I would drag his performance into the bright light and show the cracks in his mask. And once my mind settled on that, something in me went calm. The terrifying kind of calm you feel when there's only one path left to walk. The next family appointment at the lawyer's office was already in place for paperwork he was handling with Mom. That was where I'd strike. That was where this charade was going to break. Shall I write the next chapter? The day of that appointment, I could feel my heart hammering as I waited in the lawyer's office. The air smelled like stale coffee, thick with that strange silence you only get in bureaucratic spaces. Tense, but polished. My mother sat beside me fidgeting with her purse strap, oblivious to the fact that my entire life was about to tip over. Then he walked in. My ex-stepfather, impeccably dressed, radiating that smug calmness that people mistake for control. He shook the lawyer's hand, as if this was his stage, and everyone else was merely here to admire his performance. We went through the routine documents first, his voice filling the room with feigned responsibility. Just handling family affairs, keeping things clear and tidy. I almost laughed at the audacity, but then I felt the document folder under my arm, and with it, the strength to finally tear his little play apart. When there was a pause, I leaned forward and said, clear enough that both he and the lawyer couldn't look away, before we go any further, I need clarification about the lease on the apartment, because I overheard you last week telling someone I'd already agreed to vacate. That's a lie. And I've been paying every single month. Here are the transfers. I slid the copies of my bank records onto the desk. His smile faltered. Just a flicker, but it was there. A crack in the confident shell. He quickly masked it with a chuckle, turning toward my mother as though I'd just told an amusing story. She must have misheard. You know how dramatic she can be, always assuming the worst. But the lawyer wasn't laughing. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the records. These are consistent payments, in her name, to you directly. If you have represented otherwise, we should clarify now. That was when I twisted the knife. My voice didn't shake when I said, because I also overheard you boasting that keeping the lease under your name lets you hold it over me. You said people believe you're generous because you house me out of kindness, when the truth is, I couldn't leave even if I wanted to. The lawyer's pen froze mid-note. My mother's head snapped toward him, confusion and hurt written across her face. And he stumbled. He tried to recover with that syrup voice. She must be twisting my words. You know how it is. Kids don't always understand nuance. But for the first time, his script didn't land. He wasn't the composed provider anymore. He was the man whose act had been exposed under professional ears. And then, the lawyer asked the one question that changed everything. Do you, or do you not, intend to block her from transferring the lease into her own name, despite years of her paying it? I could see it in his eyes. He was cornered. And suddenly, his performance didn't look elegant anymore. It looked desperate. What he said next sent shockwaves through the room, and for the first time, my mother had to pick a side. Shall I write the next chapter? His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might try to laugh it off again. But then something ugly flashed across his face and he snapped, "Of course I don't intend to block her. Don't be ridiculous. I've only kept the lease for appearances. Do you think anyone in this family would have believed she could manage it on her own at the time? I was just protecting the image of stability. That's all." The words hung in the air like poison. Protecting the image. Not protecting me. Not protecting Mom. Protecting his reputation. I turned to look at my mother, and in that instant, her expression shattered. The gentle hope that he was still reasonable, that he was playing fair, dissolved right in front of me. "So all this time," she whispered, almost to herself, "it wasn't about helping her at all. It was about you." He tried to pivot, reaching for her with his voice, softening again. "Come on, don't make it sound so sinister. I've been the one keeping her a roof over her head. What kind of monster would that make me if I hadn't?" But my mother wasn't with him anymore. She was recoiling, blinking at the file of my rent transfers, like she had finally seen the invisible thread of control he had been pulling all these years. And worst for him, the lawyer didn't let it slide. "With respect," the lawyer said firmly, "your client rights are secondary here. As the payer and occupant, she has grounds to request transfer immediately, particularly given your explicit conflict of interest. Image management is not a legal justification for withholding housing security." I felt something snap inside me then. Not fear, but release. For so long, I'd been gaslit into questioning if I was dramatic, ungrateful, unstable. And here was an authoritative voice, cutting through the fog. "You are right. He is wrong." He threw his hands up, all performance gone, his voice sharpened into anger now. "Fine. If it matters so much, she can have it. But don't come crying to me when she realizes what a burden it is. Don't forget who shielded you this long." His attempt at regaining the upper hand fell flat. He had already revealed too much. His mask torn, the generous provider turned into a man, exposed in front of the very woman whose loyalty kept his cover intact. The lawyer began the paperwork then and there, drafting steps for immediate lease transfer. My mother, silent and pale, signed as witness. I sat still, my hands gripping the edge of the chair, trying to process that this battle I thought I couldn't win was suddenly unfolding in my favor. But afterward, when we stepped outside, I realized the fight wasn't over. Reputation was his currency, and I had just burned half his savings in front of someone who mattered. He wasn't going to let me walk away without trying to claw back control, which meant the fallout was coming, and I had no idea how brutal it would be. Shall I write the next chapter? The fallout hit faster than I imagined. Within 48 hours, the phone calls began. First from my aunt, then a couple of cousins. Each of them repeated nearly the same line, like a script he'd handed them. "Why are you attacking the man who gave you a place to live? Why are you making him look like the bad guy?" It was breathtaking, how quickly he managed to rewrite events. In their version, I wasn't the one fighting to keep a home. I was the ungrateful child, dragging family affairs into courtrooms and lawyer offices because I wanted control. That word sliced every time I heard it, as if I were the power-hungry one, not him who had been digging invisible hooks into me for years. He even had the audacity to post online a photo of himself on the balcony of my building with the caption, "Doing my duty as always, ensuring stability for family, no matter the burden." It picked up likes and sentimental comments from neighbors and relatives who knew nothing of the truth. My chest burned reading it, because it was exactly the narrative he had boasted about spinning on the phone. The image of the noble man, sacrificing while the younger generation mocked his kindness. Then came the financial jabs. The next month's rent payment bounced back from his account, for the first time in years, leaving me scrambling. When I messaged him, he responded, "Direct payments to me are no longer necessary, since apparently I'm no longer needed." It was spite disguised as magnanimity, leaving me rushing to make emergency payments directly to the property office before they counted me as late. He wanted me to trip, even now, so he could point and say, "See, she can't handle it." But the biggest blow was what he did to my mother. Quietly, subtly, he positioned himself as the wounded party, sighing about how he never thought his devotion would be repaid with this sort of treatment. Mom wept when she repeated his words to me, torn in two. For the first time, she admitted, "I don't know who to believe anymore." That's when it hit me. Winning the legal fight hadn't ended the war. It had exposed me to a different kind of battlefield. His campaign to erase my name socially, even as my name was finally written legally into the lease. Some nights, I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I should have stayed quiet to keep the peace. But then I remembered the sound of his voice, bragging that I couldn't leave even if I tried. And I swore through gritted teeth, never again. I had one final step to take. Not to him, not to the family, but to myself. I had to draw boundaries thick enough that even he couldn't reshape them into a performance. The reversal was his collapse of image, but my true resolution had yet to come. Shall I write the next chapter? When the paperwork finally came through, and my name, my own name, was printed boldly at the top of that lease, it should have been the clean break I'd been fighting for. I stood in my kitchen holding the document like it was proof of my existence, something nobody could rewrite or twist. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving under someone else's shadow. The apartment was mine. The walls echoed differently, like they were acknowledging me, not him. But liberation doesn't erase scars. The silence after the battle was deafening, heavy with all the things that couldn't be undone. Half the family still parroted his version of events, painting me as ungrateful, disrespectful, the child who bit the hand that fed her. Some have stopped calling altogether. When I walk into gatherings now, there are stares, subtle pauses in conversations, the sort of invisible wall you feel but can't name. That was part of his fallout too, fragmenting relationships until I stood alone enough to question whether it had been worth it. And yet, I look around my apartment and remember why I fought. Every mug on the shelf, every stack of books by the window. These are my choices, my presents, not favors granted, not props for someone else's story. The lease on the fridge was more than paper. It was a declaration that nobody else gets to sit in a room, rewriting my life on my behalf. Oddly enough, the victory wasn't only in the apartment. It was in reclaiming my sanity. For months, maybe years, I had let him gaslight me into thinking that speaking up was unacceptable, that drawing lines made me cruel. I see now that's the most dangerous lie, that keeping the peace is worth more than keeping yourself intact. My mother still wavers between the two truths, clinging to his mask and peeking behind it at the same time. I don't push her. Everyone drifts toward honesty in their own time. But for me, the time for silence is over. The strangest part? After all of this, I don't feel hatred. What I feel is clarity, the cutting knowledge that sometimes the sharpest blades in a family aren't words spoken in anger, but lies disguised as care. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Independence doesn't always mean buying a house or making more money. Sometimes it's as small and as enormous as putting your own name on something you already paid for with your life. Sometimes the paper that saves you fits in one folder, one page. And for the first time, I can breathe in my own space, in my own right, without owing anyone a performance.